Every time someone whispers, "I love you," into your ear, a transaction just cleared. You felt something, didn't you? That warm chemical flood, that sense of being chosen, that delicious relief, that maybe, just maybe, you're worth something after all. But here's what they'll never tell you in the greeting card aisle or the wedding industrial complex. That feeling has a price, and you've been paying it in a currency you didn't even know you were spending. Machiavelli understood what your kindergarten teacher and your romantic comedy obsession desperately tried to hide from you. Love is not a mystical force that descends from the heavens. It is a negotiation between two parties, each extracting value, each calculating return on investment, each deciding moment by moment whether the exchange rate favors their continued participation. The weak call this cynical. The powerful call it Tuesday. You've been fed a lie so sweet, so intoxicating, so perfectly calibrated to keep you compliant that you've built your entire romantic operating system around it. Unconditional love. The soulmate myth. The one. Disney didn't just sell you movies. They sold you a theological framework that guaranteed your exploitation. From the moment you could process narrative, you were programmed to believe that somewhere out there someone would love you for nothing, accept you completely, require no change, demand no growth, expect no value in return. This is perhaps the most profitable lie ever sold to the human species. It turns you into a consumer of your own emotional destruction, refreshing your dating apps like a laboratory rat pressing a lever for cocaine-laced water, wondering why you're exhausted, confused, and somehow always coming up short. The fairy tale served a purpose, of course. It always does. Keep the masses believing in magic and they won't develop strategy. Keep them chasing the ineffable and they won't audit the actual. You are taught that calculating in love makes you cold, that strategy makes you manipulative, that protecting your interests makes you unworthy of the very thing you seek. This is not accidental. This is systematic disarmament. They took away your ability to negotiate by convincing you that negotiation itself was the enemy of authenticity. They told you to be vulnerable, to give freely, to love without reservation, and then they watched as you hemorrhaged value to people who never stopped calculating their own advantage. Here's the diagnosis you've been avoiding. You are the product. Not in some abstract metaphorical sense, but in the most literal economic terms available. Your attention is currency, and you've been spending it like a lottery winner in a casino, designed by people who understand probability better than you do. Every text you send carries a cost. Every emotional disclosure is a payment. Every moment you spend thinking about them, wondering about them, shaping yourself around the possibility of them, you are transferring value from your account to theirs. And most of you, if you're honest in the 3 a.m. darkness when the performance finally drops, have been running a deficit for so long you've forgotten what surplus feels like. The invoice is always there, you just weren't taught to read it. Security, that's a line item. Validation, that's recurring monthly. Status, the ability to signal to your social network that someone chose you, that's a premium service. Sexual access, emotional labor, the performance of interest in their hobbies and their problems and their endless need to be witnessed. These are all payments you make, often without ever negotiating the terms. You became a subscription service that never increases prices, never audits usage, never cuts off freeloaders. And the moment, that terrible clarifying moment, when you finally see the balance sheet, when you realize you've been paying compound interest on a loan you didn't know you took out, that's when the comfortable numbness finally cracks, and something colder, something more honest, something more useful starts to take its place. The validation economy runs on your need to be affirmed by someone outside yourself. This is the original sin of modern romance. You outsourced your sense of worth to another person's perception, and in doing so, you gave them pricing power over your entire emotional existence. Being seen, being understood, being chosen, these became the heroin you couldn't function without. And like any addiction, the tolerance builds. What used to satisfy you, a glance, a text, a casual touch, now requires ever-increasing doses. You need more attention, more reassurance, more proof that you exist in their world. This is not love. This is dependency dressed in the language of connection. And dependency, in any negotiation, is catastrophic to your leverage. Machiavelli saw through the poetry to the mechanics. He understood that human relationships, all of them, operate on exchange. You provide utility, pleasure, or virtue. They provide the same. The relationship persists as long as both parties perceive the exchange as favorable. This is not pessimism. This is engineering. The prince who fails to understand what he offers and what he receives will not remain prince for long. The lover who fails to understand the same will not remain loved. You think this makes connection impossible, but you have it backwards. Pretending the transaction doesn't exist is what makes connection impossible. You cannot negotiate terms you refuse to acknowledge. You cannot protect your interests in a game you pretend isn't being played. And here's the paradox that breaks most people. Equal exchange creates resentment. When you're keeping perfect score, when you're matching effort for effort, investment for investment, the relationship becomes a spreadsheet and the soul dies. But unequal exchange creates resentment too, just slower, more toxic, more permanently damaging. The person who gives more begins to feel used. The person who gives less begins to feel contempt. Both outcomes are inevitable once you lose sight of the central truth. This is not about scorekeeping. This is about understanding value so deeply that you stop giving from deficit and start building from surplus. The transaction is not the enemy. Your amateur understanding of the transaction is the enemy. You've been playing a game of multidimensional chess with checkers-level consciousness, and then wondering why you keep losing to people who saw the whole board from the beginning. You want to know why you keep losing in love? Because you're addicted to the very thing that destroys your value. You're a junkie for validation, and like every addict, you've convinced yourself that your dependency is actually virtue. You call it being vulnerable. You call it being open. You call it being real. What you're actually doing is handing over your negotiating power in exchange for a hit of dopamine that lasts exactly as long as it takes for the other person to realize you'll do anything for the next dose. The validation economy operates on the same principles as any market: supply and demand. When you flood the market with your need to be seen, to be affirmed, to be told that you matter, you crash your own value. Every text you send seeking reassurance, every time you reshape yourself to fit someone else's preferences, every moment you sacrifice your frame to maintain their comfort. You're not building connection. You're liquidating assets. You're having a going out of business sale on your own soul, and you're surprised when bargain hunters show up instead of serious investors. Here's what they don't tell you about modern relationships. They've been gamified. The entire apparatus, from dating apps to social media to the endless content telling you to communicate your needs, has been designed to extract maximum validation-seeking behavior while delivering minimum genuine connection. You've been trained like a laboratory animal to press the lever, to seek the pellet, to perform the dance that generates engagement metrics for platforms that profit from your emotional instability. And you think you're being authentic. You think you're being emotionally intelligent. You're being farmed. Machiavelli understood something that would get you cancelled in 3 seconds flat if you said it at brunch. Love is not a feeling. Love is an exchange. Not in some cynical, cold-hearted way that denies human connection, but in the most pragmatic, reality-based way possible. Every relationship operates on 3 currencies, whether you acknowledge them or not. Utility, what you provide in practical terms. Pleasure, the emotional and physical satisfaction you generate. And virtue, the character and values you embody that elevate the other person's life. When you pretend these don't exist, when you operate under the delusion that love should be unconditional, you don't transcend the transaction. You just become incompetent at it. Stop watching. Go to the comments and tell me what you think. Do you think that love is eternal, or do you accept the cold Machiavellian truth? The 3 currencies are not equally weighted, and this is where most people destroy themselves. They maximize utility, become the reliable one, the one who always shows up, always helps, always sacrifices, and then wonder why they're treated like an appliance instead of a partner. Or they focus entirely on pleasure, on being fun and exciting and sexually available, and then act shocked when they're not taken seriously. Or worst of all, they lead with virtue signaling, performing their moral superiority and emotional evolution, broadcasting their therapy insights and boundary-setting skills. Completely missing that virtue without utility or pleasure is just sanctimonious posturing that makes you exhausting to be around. The exchange must be balanced across all three domains. But here's the paradox that will break your brain if you're still thinking like an amateur. Perfect balance creates resentment. When the exchange is exactly equal, when both parties are giving precisely what they're getting, the relationship becomes transactional in the worst sense. It becomes visible. The mechanism shows through. Both people start keeping score. And the moment you're keeping score, you've already lost. The art is in creating asymmetric value, where both parties feel they're getting more than they're giving. And that requires something most people are utterly incapable of. It requires you to generate value from surplus, not from deficit. This is the affirmation trap's deepest mechanism. When you seek external validation, you're announcing to everyone with eyes to see that you're operating from deficit. You need something. You're incomplete. You require external input to maintain your psychological equilibrium. And in that moment, you've surrendered every advantage you had in the negotiation. Because the person who needs less always has more power. Not the person who pretends to need less. Not the person who plays games and manufactures artificial scarcity. The person who genuinely needs less because they've built something internally that doesn't require constant external maintenance. Watch what happens to the overgiver. They enter the relationship with their cup already half empty, desperately hoping the other person will fill it. They give and give and give, not from abundance but from a panicked attempt to make themselves indispensable. They're not generous, they're terrified. Every act of service, every sacrifice, every moment of putting the other person first is actually a desperate bid for the validation that will finally make them feel whole. And the other person can smell it. Maybe not consciously, maybe they can't articulate it. But on some primal level, they register that this giving is not a gift. It's a demand with a delayed invoice. So what happens? The overgiver gives more, the receiver receives more. And instead of gratitude increasing, it decreases. Instead of the bond strengthening, it weakens. The overgiver becomes increasingly resentful that their sacrifice isn't being recognized, isn't being reciprocated, isn't generating the validation they were promised by every romantic comedy and self-help book. And the receiver becomes increasingly contemptuous, because on a subconscious level, they've registered that anyone who gives this much must not value themselves very highly. If you're selling yourself at clearance prices, don't be surprised when you're treated like discount merchandise. The psychological collapse follows a predictable pattern. First, confusion. They were doing everything right according to the cultural script. They were communicating, compromising, showing up, being vulnerable. Why isn't it working? Then anger. The other person is ungrateful, narcissistic, incapable of appreciating what they have. Then bargaining. Maybe if they give even more, explain their needs more clearly, set better boundaries, the other person will finally see their value. Then depression. They're unlovable. Something is fundamentally wrong with them. They're not enough. And finally, if they're lucky, acceptance. But not the healthy kind, the broken kind. The kind where they accept that this is just how relationships are, that love is suffering, that they should be grateful for whatever scraps of affection they receive. And through all of this, they never see the actual problem. They were never negotiating, they were supplicating. They confused transaction with betrayal because they'd been taught that acknowledging the exchange somehow makes it less real, less meaningful, less love. This is perhaps the most damaging lie you've been sold. That consciousness of the mechanism destroys the magic. That if you see love as an exchange, it becomes cold and calculating and inhuman. The opposite is true. When you don't see the exchange, when you pretend it doesn't exist, you become a blind participant in a game where everyone else can see the board except you. Being yourself is terrible negotiation strategy, and this might be the most controversial thing you'll hear today. Not because you shouldn't be authentic, but because the self you are right now, the one that's been shaped by a culture designed to make you a better consumer and a worse negotiator, that self is probably not optimized for the kind of relationships you actually want. You've been told to show up as you are, to let people take you or leave you, to never change for anyone else. This is advice designed to keep you exactly where you are. Weak, dependent, easy to manipulate. The sophisticated player understands that you don't show up as you are. You show up as the best version of what you're capable of becoming. You don't change for other people. You evolve for yourself, and then you allow only people who can match that evolution to enter your sphere. You don't negotiate from your current position. You negotiate from your future position, and you make it clear that the train is leaving with or without them. This isn't manipulation. This is having standards. This is understanding that your time and energy and emotional labor are finite resources that should be invested strategically, not distributed indiscriminately to anyone who shows you a moment of attention. The trap is confusing transaction with betrayal. You think that if you acknowledge the exchange, you're somehow being dishonest or mercenary or unromantic. But you're already in a transaction. You always were. The only question is whether you're a conscious participant or an unconscious victim. Every moment you spend with someone is time you're not spending developing yourself, building your resources, expanding your options. Every emotional investment you make is energy you're not directing toward your own evolution. This isn't cynical. This is just math. And the people who pretend the math doesn't exist are the ones who end up bankrupt, wondering why they gave everything and received nothing. You want to know the real red flag? It's not that someone is transactional. It's that someone is transactional and incompetent at it. The person who keeps score but has no idea how to accurately value what they're giving or receiving. The person who thinks showing up is enough, who believes that mere presence constitutes contribution, who confuses their need to be in a relationship with their value within a relationship. These are the people who will drain you dry while genuinely believing they're being generous, because they're measuring in the wrong currency, using the wrong metrics, playing the wrong game entirely. Now we arrive at the operational framework, the three immutable laws that separate those who command desire from those who beg for it. These aren't suggestions. These aren't philosophical musings. These are the mechanisms by which power flows in every intimate exchange you will ever have. Learn them, or continue hemorrhaging value in every relationship you enter. Law 1. Scarcity creates value. This is not metaphor. This is economic reality transposed onto human desire. Every single thing you have ever wanted, every object you have ever coveted, every person you have ever pursued, derived its magnetic pull from one fundamental characteristic. It was not easily obtained. Abundance, true abundance, obliterates desire. When something is always available, always accessible, always waiting for you, the human brain categorizes it as low value. This is not cynicism. This is neurobiology. This is thousands of years of evolutionary programming that cannot be wished away by your romantic ideals. You have been told that making yourself available demonstrates love, that being consistently present shows commitment, that accessibility proves devotion. These are the lies that keep you powerless. The person who is always available is the person who has nothing else of value occurring in their life. The person who drops everything at a text message. The person who rearranges their entire schedule to accommodate another's whims. The person who makes themselves endlessly accessible is broadcasting a single message. I have nothing more valuable than you. Which sounds romantic until you understand what it actually communicates. It says my time has no competing demands. My attention has no other worthy recipients. My presence commands no premium because there is no market for it. Scarcity is not game playing. Scarcity is having a life so rich, so full, so genuinely valuable that access to you becomes something that must be earned, negotiated, scheduled. The person with abundance mentality does not manufacture scarcity through manipulation. They embody it through genuine value creation. They are not pretending to be busy. They are actually building something. They are not artificially withholding attention. They have genuinely important things demanding that attention. This is the difference between strategic scarcity and pathetic manipulation. One comes from genuine value. The other comes from insecurity masquerading as strategy. When you make yourself scarce, you force the other party to consider what they are willing to exchange for access to you. You create a natural filtration system. The people who are not willing to meet your price self-select out. The people who recognize value when they see it rise to meet it. This is not cruelty. This is clarity. You are not playing hard to get. You are actually hard to get because getting you requires something substantial in return. Your time, your attention, your emotional investment. These are not infinite resources to be distributed freely. They are premium assets to be allocated strategically. And here's what the romantics will never tell you. Desire does not survive constant availability. The person who is always there becomes invisible. They become wallpaper. They become the reliable option, which is another way of saying the backup plan, which is another way of saying the person we settle for when what we actually want is not available. You do not want to be someone's reliable option. You want to be their premium choice. And premium choices are never abundant. Law 2. Never negotiate from deficit. This is where most people destroy themselves before the negotiation even begins. They enter relationships from a position of lack, from hunger, from desperation, from the belief that they need this person to complete them, to validate them, to make them whole. And the moment you enter from deficit, you have already lost. The moment you need the deal more than the other party, you have surrendered all leverage. The moment your happiness depends on their acceptance, you have given them pricing power over your entire existence. Look at how people enter relationships. They are starving for affection, desperate for validation, terrified of being alone. They meet someone who shows them basic human decency and they interpret it as cosmic significance. They meet someone who gives them attention and they treat it like a rare gift rather than a standard offering. They are negotiating from such profound deficit that they accept terms no one operating from surplus would ever consider. They accept breadcrumbs and call it a feast. They accept inconsistency and call it mystery. They accept poor treatment and call it complexity. The power of the pre-qualified self cannot be overstated. This is the person who has done the internal work before entering the external negotiation. The person who has built a life they do not need to escape from. The person who has developed skills, resources, relationships, purposes that make them genuinely valuable, independent of any romantic arrangement. This person does not need a relationship. They are open to one. They are willing to consider one. But their baseline happiness, their fundamental stability, their core identity does not depend on it. When you negotiate from surplus, everything changes. You are not asking for permission to be valuable. You are offering access to existing value. You are not seeking completion. You are considering partnership. You are not filling a void. You are potentially expanding an already functional empire. This shift in frame changes every dynamic that follows. The person negotiating from surplus can walk away, and the ability to walk away is the only real power in any negotiation. Desperation is visible in every micro-expression, in how quickly you respond to messages, in how eagerly you agree to plans, in how much you compromise your own preferences to accommodate theirs, in how you laugh too hard at mediocre jokes, in how you tolerate behavior you would never accept from anyone else, in how you make excuses for their failures while holding yourself to impossible standards. The desperate negotiator is transparent. They are broadcasting their lack of options. They are advertising their willingness to accept poor terms, and the market responds accordingly. You want to know why some people seem to effortlessly command devotion while others beg for scraps? It is not attractiveness, it is not charm, it is negotiating position. The person who enters from surplus sets the terms, they establish the standards. They determine what is acceptable and what is not. And because they are genuinely willing to walk away from anything that does not meet their criteria, they attract people who are willing to meet those criteria. This is not manipulation. This is market dynamics applied to human connection. Law 3. Audit the exchange quarterly. This is where the sophisticated separate from the amateurs. Most people never look at the actual balance sheet of their relationships. They operate on feeling, on hope, on the sunk cost fallacy, that because they have already invested so much, they cannot possibly withdraw now. They confuse duration with value. They mistake familiarity for fulfillment. They continue pouring resources into arrangements that stopped generating returns years ago. The relationship balance sheet is brutally simple. On one side, what you are providing: your time, your emotional labor, your financial contribution, your social value, your physical presence, your intellectual stimulation, your support, your flexibility, your sacrifice. On the other side, what you are receiving: the same categories, same metrics. Then you compare, not with resentment, not with bitterness, with the cold clarity of an accountant reviewing quarterly earnings. Red flags are not mysterious. They are line items on a balance sheet that do not add up. One-sided emotional labor means you are consistently managing their feelings, absorbing their stress, providing their therapy, while receiving none in return. One-sided flexibility means you are always the one adjusting, accommodating, compromising, while their preferences remain non-negotiable. One-sided investment means you are planning the future, building the structure, maintaining the relationship, while they simply show up and consume what you have created. The sophisticated practitioner audits quarterly because relationships are not static. They are dynamic systems that shift over time. What began as equal exchange can slowly drift into exploitation if you are not paying attention. The person who was once generous becomes entitled. The person who was once considerate becomes demanding. The person who was once invested becomes complacent. And if you are not regularly reviewing the terms, you will wake up one day to discover you have been operating at a loss for years while convincing yourself it is love. When to withdraw investment versus when to double down. This is the critical decision point. Withdraw when the pattern is clear and unchanging. When you have communicated the imbalance and received only promises that never materialize into action. When the other party demonstrates through behavior, not words, that they are content with the current arrangement regardless of its impact on you. When your investment is not generating returns and shows no sign of ever doing so. Withdrawal is not punishment. It is resource reallocation. It is refusing to continue funding a failing venture. Double down when the imbalance is temporary and addressable. When both parties recognize the issue and actively work to correct it. When investment from both sides is high and the return is mutual, even if the current moment shows strain. When the partnership is genuinely building something larger than either individual could construct alone. Doubling down is not desperation. It is strategic intensification of a profitable arrangement. Now we arrive at the elite subscription, the transcendent transaction. This is the level most will never reach because they are too busy either keeping petty score or pretending score does not exist. The elite understanding is this: conscious transaction creates authentic connection. When both parties understand that relationship is exchange, when both parties are clear about what they offer and what they require, when both parties actively maintain balance, something extraordinary emerges. Not the false intimacy of codependence, not the hollow performance of romance, but genuine partnership between two sovereign entities. This is two people who have built themselves into empires deciding to build something larger together. Not because they need each other, because they recognize that strategic alliance multiplies rather than merely adds. This is mutual empire building. Each party brings resources, skills, vision. Each party maintains their sovereignty while contributing to shared objectives. Each party audits the exchange not with resentment, but with the precision of a CEO reviewing a joint venture. The final paradox that Machiavelli understood but never explicitly stated: when you treat love as transaction, when you bring clarity and honesty to the exchange, when you refuse to hide behind romantic mythology, you create the conditions for something deeper than the fairy tale ever promised. Because you are not relating to a fantasy, you are relating to a real person with real value who has made a real choice to exchange with you. There is no pretense, no performance, no desperate clinging to illusions. Just two people who see each other clearly and choose the exchange anyway. This is amor fati in human form. Love of fate, not the passive acceptance of whatever comes, but the active choice to engage with reality as it is and build something magnificent within those constraints. You do not love despite the transaction. You love because of the clarity the transaction provides. You know exactly what you have, you know exactly what it costs, you know exactly what it is worth, and you choose it with open eyes. So here is your choice. Continue operating under the comfortable delusions that have kept you powerless. Continue believing that acknowledging exchange somehow taints connection. Continue giving without negotiating and wondering why you feel empty, or renegotiate. Audit your current arrangements. Establish clear terms. Demand reciprocity. Walk away from anything that does not meet your standards. Enter every connection from surplus, never from deficit. And watch as the quality of everything you attract transforms completely. Love is not dead. Your negotiation skills are. Fix them. Subscribe to join the 1% who understand what everyone else is too afraid to acknowledge. The game is always being played. The only question is whether you are playing it consciously or being played. Choose power, choose clarity, choose transaction with eyes wide open. Everything else is just expensive fantasy.